Welcome to the Consulting Growth Podcast. I'm Professor Joe O'Mahony, a Professor of Consulting at Cardiff University and an advisor to consultancies that want to grow. If you'd like to find more out about me and access some free resources to help your consultancy grow, do please visit joeomahony.com. That's joeomahoney.com. Great, thank you for joining us. We have the pleasure of Steve Watmough with us today. Steve's had a very interesting and varied career. Spent around 30 years, I guess perhaps more, in tech consulting, and has been part of, as far as I know, as part of two exits. One is where, Steve, you were the CEO of Xantus and sold to KPMG, and you were then the CEO of Mason Advisory and are now the executive chair. But on top of that, you've done a lot of non-exec roles and advisory roles. So you've been around the blocks, I guess.
Yes.
In terms of
There's only one business exit, but yes, to a change in this role for sure.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Apologies. Yeah. So what I'd love to do, if we had the time, I would love to, talk more about your NED roles and especially with the charitable stuff, because we've got a lot in common there. But I guess in terms of my students and my listeners, it would be really interesting to hear about the growth of, I guess, Xantus, but also Mason Advisory, because you grew those into significant businesses, but at very different times. So would you mind if we started off sort of digging a little bit about what took you to Xantus in the first place, and I guess your experience of growth in that company, I guess in terms of what you did and any obstacles that you came across?
Okay, I'll give it a try. So there is a sort of an extra bit at the start, which was my first 10 years of my career broadly was spent working for Boots as a business technology consultant, if you like, within Boots Group, which at the time was a thriving retail, pharmaceutical, manufacturing conglomerate business. 100,000 people based in Nottingham, and everybody knows Boots. So that was kind of where I suppose I learnt the backdrop of the role that technology was starting to play within business. Started to see a few consultants on the block as well. It wasn't really common to have lots of technology consultants in your business in those days. It looked like an interesting route. And I joined a business in the mid-90s, which was relatively a startup called Mason Communications.
Yep.
And so Mason Communications was a technology advisory firm, did a lot of work in the mobile phone industry, a lot of work in the sort of engineering technology world. And I joined that business to kind of build a technology advisory capability targeted towards corporate businesses. And I did that for 4 years prior to then leaving that business and ultimately setting up from scratch Xantus, which was a startup in 2000. And exactly as you said, we built that business sort of from ground up to something that was probably just short of 100 people when we sold it to KPMG in 2011.
I guess the growth of that firm, these days there's a host of wonderful technological solutions, PSAs, CRMs, and all the rest of it that enable you to, whereas I'm guessing then, I certainly know with the PSAs, there wasn't that type of availability to help you support the infrastructure of the growth.
No, there was a lot of Excel spreadsheets.
Sure.
And I think the whole of that period, so to be honest, I'm not sure there was that much to help us in that sort of technology support bit, even through to 2011, really. When I moved into KPMG, we ran our business on SAP, which was kind of equally complicated the other way, really. So, but yeah, we definitely, there were some product, we ran our finances on QuickBooks in those days, which was actually quite a challenging product before things went to the cloud, but that was the core of the finances. We did have very, very early, I suppose what would ultimately now have been Salesforce, but sort of forerunner to that type of product where we would have managed contacts, and lots and lots of Excel spreadsheets.
Sure.
But the growth was all around, 4 of us set that business up on day one. I do remember now the first hire that we made, and that seemed like the riskiest decision on the planet ever. Who would we hire? What would they do? How would they spend their day one, week one? But, relatively quickly we got into the swing of that.
Who was your first hire? Which role? What role was it?
To be honest, we did hire somebody who provided us with both marketing support, business support, really helped us run the business. That was actually day one hire. But our first consultant hire was somebody that, in fact, I'd worked with a number of years back in my Boots days. I think that was the first hire. I'd have to remember now. It was somebody who was quite experienced, who we thought could help, because all four of us were doing consulting work ourselves at that point, of course. And it was somebody we thought had a broad set of skills that could help us.
Okay, so you've got now 2 people working at the firm, plus the 4 founders.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the journey to 100 odd people. What were the lessons learned that you brought forward, and what would you do differently, I guess?
And you quite rightly said at the start of this that it was a subtly different world then. I guess the world of technology consulting was only just really becoming a thing.
Yep.
10 years prior to that, technology consulting would have literally been around listening to a client problem, going away, writing a report, probably telling them what the best product was to buy or something like that, and then going away again. By the time we got into the sort of 2000s, we were into a world where a lot of technology was being outsourced. So that sort of had a couple of things attached to it. One, clients were keen to bring in resources to help them put these outsourced contracts into place. They were big, they were complicated, they'd not really done them before. So they were keen to get external skills to support that. But of course, the advent of outsourcing also meant a lot of skills transfer from firms into providers. So suddenly all of the skills that firms had to help them decide what to do in technology terms, many of those skills were now sat in provider firms. So there was a gap, if you like, that needed filling.
Yeah.
So both how to put the contracts into place, but also then really how to manage developments that occurred post-contract. So suddenly there was a fairly latent market, I guess, that come from nearly nowhere, very, very commercial, because also firms were spending a lot of money on technology by this time. It was, of course, becoming very, very critical to their organizations. So importance was high, spend was really high, but actually capability was quite low because a lot of it had actually transferred. So we set the firm up, we're always intending to be a staff-based firm. I guess that's one of the early decisions that people make. Do you want to focus really on winning business and then finding people to do it? Or do you build a business itself which has got the skills and capabilities and then go and market and sell those skills and meet the kind of client demands that you find along the way? And that was always the space we were in. So hiring the best people, finding people who could help us hire the best people was really, really important part of what we did.
How did you attract those people? Because I'm guessing a lot of those, or some of those people might have been at big brand names, and perhaps you didn't have the same cash resources as say, Accenture might have had at the time, or Arthur Andersen, perhaps. So how did you go about attracting those good people?
Stories and projects, I suppose. Even in those days, it seemed quite obvious that to get the best people, you needed to have a realistic capability to offer the best projects. So, in this sort of in this consulting technology, where people will follow the most exciting projects. That's what they want to work on, and they'll go where they think those projects exist. Of course, there were much bigger players in the market than us, but probably this may be an exaggeration, but consulting was tending to hire people right from the very beginning of their careers, and rather than hiring experienced people. Whereas so we started to hire experienced people that might not have looked always like the perfect sort of big company candidate, but had a lot to offer. And we spent time taking often people with skills, but not necessarily having consulting experience, and giving them the opportunities to develop that consulting experience rather than sort of the other way around. So we were a slightly different offer. I guess we were already a small firm rather than a larger firm. So we were looking to attract some people who maybe didn't want to work in a really big firm, but felt that they'd be better suited to work in a smaller firm. So I guess it was trying to use the differentiators that we had. There weren't so many medium-sized advisory firms in those days. Firms tended to be really small or really big. So having the aspiration of being somewhere in the middle that could offer hopefully the best of both worlds was where we were keen to go.
And you talked about a lot of the people you hired weren't consultants, but they were bright, able people, and you gave them the consultancy skills. Now, that's a challenge that a lot of firms have, did you do that through fairly standardized training programs, or was it more of a mentoring approach? And I guess one of the challenges that some of my clients have had is they'll bring non-consultants on and then they'll be banging their heads against the wall because these people don't know how to sell, don't know how to talk to clients and things like that. Was that a challenge that you encountered? And if so, how did you overcome it?
I think it's an ongoing challenge in our industry, really, that typically technology people like to get on and do, and sometimes don't always have the same softer skills. But, all of these skills can be trained to some extent. And I guess we've always focused on taking the best talent that we can. It's hard to really train some of the deeper experience type skills that you need to have, whereas some of the softer skills, I think you can train if people are willing and want to develop those skills. So yeah, I think we've always believed in putting mixed teams together, so never putting everybody the same. So probably we try and blend experience with client approaches. Sometimes people can build brilliant client relationships very, very quickly early on without necessarily having all of the in-depth delivery experience. So I guess always blending those teams, and then ultimately building teams that we were confident could deliver successfully to clients, but also in doing so are going to this such leading edge type work that actually working on the best projects, as they say, is how you also bag and develop the best experience. So it's it's a subtle blend, I suppose, of not sounding like you're just going in there to try and you're always learning on a project, but you're also trying to give the most that the whole team's got from the experience.
Yep. And reflecting on both the firms, because you grew them both to a similar size, what inflection points did you notice where the firm had to change, either had to become more professional or, delegation and roles, and perhaps, some of the senior team stepping back sometimes or getting professionals in at a senior level? So I'm interested in the inflection points that consultancies go through when they grow.
So, and when you say the two, so are you thinking now into the Mason Advisory world as well?
Yeah, so I'm thinking of both Xantus and Mason Advisory, and whether they were similar in terms of the...
Yeah, so I think back in the Mason Communications days, one of the things I did learn there was that you need to be relatively ambitious quite early on. I think there's a really significant inflection point quite early. You're building a consulting firm where you go from the founders being the people who sell all the work, manage all the work, hire all the people, manage all the people, deliver all the work, to suddenly saying, actually, we need to find a team of people that we trust to just offload some of that responsibility. We need more people finding business. We need more people managing business, more people. So that's definitely not necessarily the first, but it's one really, really significant inflection, and one that I think some people never get past, because if you never really trust other people to be better than you are doing that, then you never really get the growth. And that's okay, as I'm thinking there's some really successful firms where the founders still do all of that. You only get to a certain size, but you have a very, very good, very experienced firm. But I think you want to grow a bigger firm, of course you have to find a way to get past that inflection. And I think that's a really, really, really tricky stage, because it is looking for a set of characteristics that are quite rare, where people have got both that delivery and management capability, particularly in a smaller firm when you probably, your route to success is to grow the firm, but you're probably still quite a small firm at that stage. So you're not necessarily paying the biggest rewards in the market, expecting people who really find people who are really, really good, got a really unique set of skills, but are actually going to buy in with you to the fact it's going to be a really exciting world today, but it might not be the best paid. But ultimately, if you're successful, the rewards will come, both in terms of the experience you get and ultimately the financial rewards as well. So you are expecting a lot, but I think those people do exist. There's not millions of them.
Yes.
I think combination of everything you've got to try and develop the people, any people that you already have that you think might possibly have that capability, at the same time as making some, at times, brave choices in the recruitment market to say, well, who might have those skills that could come in and actually just join and support the culture, the way that we do things, but also bring something new.
Yep, okay. So you've got that inflection point around, I guess, when the owners hand over some responsibilities and delegate some decision-making to seniors. Were there any other points you by surprise? Because especially with Xantus, I'm guessing it was your first gig that you started by yourself and then grew. Were there any other points where you thought, oh, especially around organisation, people, roles, communication, things like that?
Yeah, I think the other one which is quite difficult is around how much you invest in the support capability of the business. And it's obviously good business practice, good business sense to not want to overspend on things which are not directly related to delivery and so on. But ultimately, I think, again, you have to be brave and say, what is the stage when you push through? So there was a point when, whilst all of the founders were supporting other people to build the team, actually we were all doing, one was running IT and one was running finance, and one was running marketing, that sort of thing. So there was a point where we decided we needed to go and hire a proper FD and just just basically pay the money that was needed to bring in an experienced finance director. That took us some time and it was very successful, but that was a point where we really changed.
How big were you when you did that? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think we were about probably 40, 50 people.
Yeah.
I think it was probably 2/3 of the way through the journey, but it was probably halfway through the growth. I think once we got to that point and we did that confidently, then we started to accelerate the growth at that point.
Yeah, okay. And of course, you need the capital there to be able to pay a decent finance director, don't you?
Right, well, and the capital, they were some of the early things to me. We talked earlier about, back in 2000, it was an interesting time to launch a business because in one ways it was quite unusual to be doing some of the things we were doing. But actually in 2000, you only have to look to Silicon Valley, like everybody was setting a business up and the world was changing really. So finances were starting to become available. We were supported by Barclays in those days, but not after a little bit of discussion to get to that point. But we also brought some external investment on board on day one as well, which was...
Okay.
So I think, if you want to ultimately grow and hire people, you need some level of stability and you need cash to do that.
Yep, okay. When you were growing Mason Advisory, I guess the IT tech consulting world had changed. I guess it had got more competitive in the boutique area specifically. I guess one interesting question would be, what lessons did you take from your earlier experiences that worked, but also what was different second time round?
So I think the first thing that was different was the market itself had changed. Like you say, the role for, let's say, medium-sized specialist advisory firms was more developed. People were showing the way. People had taken startups to 100 people. Were starting to move into a few hundred people. And there's one or two firms out there I've got a lot of respect for that have really pushed all the way through there. I think the market, it had become less about just technology and buying technology, and it had become all about business.
Yes.
And the role of technology in helping develop the business. So in the old days, there was always our senior client probably would have been the senior tech person, and that's where it would have stopped. Whereas suddenly it was around that all of the people in senior roles in organizations saying, what role does technology have for me? Whether it was a really strategic end of, it might have been pre or post M&A, how's this going to work for me? Is there going to be a good fit between our organizations? It might have been around just buying things, but it might have been all the way through to how you deliver high quality service. So the businesses have become very attuned to the idea that the service that technology provides that's important, and is the fact that it's reliable, robust, always there. So we get engaged by businesses nowadays how to improve the quality of service delivery, even all the way through to how to mitigate things like cyber risk and so on. How do I protect my organization? How do I make sure that everything about what I do is supporting the quality and the business ethos of what I'm about? So it's become much more of a business, and indeed in management consulting terms, it's very much more, I would argue, very much business management consulting as opposed to tech consulting. And of course, these boundaries get blurred because we've got really big firms in industry that do a lot of technology delivery, but they also do a lot of technology advisory at the same time. You've got other firms that do a lot of pure business advisory, and then nowadays will do quite a lot of tech advisory as part of that. So there's a much richer set of organizations, I think, now playing different roles. So that's good in as much as it's a bigger marketplace. There's more to do. It's growing strongly. It's got different challenges because there are a lot more players and a lot more complexity to what we do, a lot more focus, I think, on value of consulting, because we've seen lots and lots in press in recent years around, hang on a minute, organisations are spending all this money, where do they get their value? So we're very value focused, very outcome focused. What is it you're trying to achieve as a firm if we're working with you, rather than just what do you want us to do? So these are joint projects, often jointly scoped with joint vision, where success is all about how do we get the client to the place that they want to get to, or indeed towards the place they want to get to. So yeah, I think the type of what we do is just changed completely in that time.
Were you one of the founders of Mason Advisory? Because you joined right at the beginning. Okay. And I mean, what I presume, I'm never asked the number of questions, but I presume with your experience and first time round, you probably could have taken it quite easy and relaxed. And I know being a CEO of a growing firm can be stressful, to say the least. But you decided to go for it a second time, and obviously very successfully. I guess what excited you? Was the excitement of, are you one of those people who just loves growing things? Or did you see a specific niche and you thought that's not being filled adequately, we can do that?
I think it was an opportunity, if I'm honest. I'd love to say that it was a massive strategic, 5 years of thinking about specialist play. I'd known, we talked earlier about the Mason business had existed originally in its own right. This is the same, significantly the same business that existed at Mason Communications back in the 90s, been acquired by Data Tech at the end of the 90s.
Okay.
Been merged with Analysis, a very successful telecoms consulting business to become Analysis Mason, and that had grown. But the traditional sort of Mason part of it had struggled for a number of reasons, really. And so there was a team which had been really successful, but I suppose looked like there might be an opportunity to build some new skills, some new life into. So we actually separated that team back out, and perhaps the creative bit of Mason Advisory was the fact that we set it up as a startup, and then we acquired on day one a team from Analysis Mason, which gave us a capability, an experience set. It gave us something. So I think the opportunity piece was, I think we could really do something here. It's quite different to just a startup where, like you say, after 2 years, we were hiring our first person. We acquired a team of 19 people on day one. So we had capability, but we also knew we needed to change some things about what the business did and where we targeted our capabilities. But we had some great capabilities to start with. So it's all about how do you keep and nurture the best of what we've got, and how do we start to change it to sort of point it towards a slightly different direction, or indeed a broader direction rather than a different direction. So we can keep everything we've got, but we can also meet the needs and opportunities of this new sort of business-oriented market, where businesses are really screaming out for, how can you help us do these complex business change programs? So I think it was all about opportunity as much as anything else, and it felt like an exciting opportunity as opposed to doing something different. I'm not sure I was ever going to sit and do nothing, but I would have done something. But this would just look like a really interesting opportunity that we could.
Did your improved knowledge of the buyer's market, and by buyers I mean the acquirers or investors, first time round, did that modify your approach to growth with Mason? In other words, obviously the world was different in terms of mergers and acquisitions when KPMG bought Xantus, and I've got no idea what your plans are with Mason. I'm sure it's to continue its successful growth. However, in terms of getting investment, running a firm efficiently, some people would say, well, it's better to, I'm guessing that Xantus was it seems that you had quite senior experienced people, and sometimes that type of company, especially these days, is harder to get funding for because it's less of a machine. So I guess I'm asking, did any of your experiences with selling Xantus influence the way in which you have structured Mason?
Interesting question. For not the obvious reasons, probably yes. I think the way I'd probably like to look at it, I had a chairman back in our old days who always said to me, you never grow a business to sell kind of thing. You grow a business on the basis it's there for forever. If you want to, opportunities will come along, and that's their forks in the road, but fundamentally focus on building the best business that you can, and it's going to be there for forever. So that would suggest that you would not be. But I think I learned some things through probably the that acquisition process that said there are things which are fundamentally valued about consulting firms, and they're fundamentally valued for a good reason because they tend to represent good firms. So actually it's worth listening to those.
Yes.
Because and I think you mentioned earlier around the roles of things like PSAs and so on. There are quite early, we got involved in a benchmarking exercise where we looked at a lot of the characteristics of our business and how we measure them and how other people measure them. Yes, I think strove to set some of our benchmarks in terms of how we measure ourselves and our KPIs around what looks kind of really good or best is considered externally to be best in class in the industry. Not for any reason other than they're good supportable metrics which we can all buy into and they all make sense really. So I think that side of it, yes. The one-off type of people, we've never looked to just sort of grow through numbers, look to grow through good capability that we could offer. And again, this time around, we already had quite an experienced team that we acquired in the Mason team that was acquired. But I would say for certainly most of the first few years, we've tended to hire experienced people as well. I think when you've got a small-ish team, where small-ish team is probably under 50, I think you need a really strong base of experienced people that you can hang teams around. Not many clients these days are just want to buy bodies. They want to buy people who can really engineer a change. So you need some experience in there. As we grow and as we've gone from sort of 50 to heading towards 100 people, then I think actually there are new roles that come in teams that can be occupied by slightly less experienced people. And actually there's a really valuable role for clients. There's also a need to develop some of our own people. So I think there is a chance now to restructure some of that. And we're looking at plans at the moment as to how we do start to develop more of our own talents. But I don't think that's driven by anything other than how do you continue to figure out how you add value to clients and on the basis of the size of teams you have.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's good practice, full stop, to develop your own. I mean, it's cheaper, first of all, but also you get better, you get people more tailored, and you don't get people coming in and saying, right, we're all doing this my way from now on, which there's often reasons why it isn't done that way, as you know. Okay. And the final thing I wanted to ask about is the question of productization. I'm asking because this is something a lot of my clients are facing at the moment. A lot of, the cost of productization has come right down. Certainly with Chat 4, it looks like you can code up things, almost free of charge. I'm not saying it's the best quality, but it's much cheaper and faster to produce web apps, software, online courses, etc. than it ever has been. It's obviously, if it works, it's decent revenue. So is this something you have looked at? Is it something you have done? And if so, how was that decision taken? What risks did you feel it might incur? How was it managed?
We're probably still on the small side in some ways for doing too much product development type stuff. I think there are there are assessment models, of course, that you tend to use at the start of engagements. Maturity models, so I think having those models, I probably see it more that to have a decent proper firm, you need to have these models, you need to have the tools.
Yep.
It's less about selling the tools and it's more about expecting, so clients would expect us as a firm to have these kind of tools.
Sure.
Back to what we're selling outcomes. So how we achieve those outcomes to some extent is up to us to figure out what the blend of people, experience, capability, tools is. Sometimes joint client teams, sometimes we need to say to clients, you need to contribute X to this project for it to be successful. So we're sort of figuring out all of the inputs that we need to create those outputs. It might sound, I'm not the massive on sort of trying to then charge a fortune for the tools, because we've probably built those, developed those, and of course our other client journeys. But I think having them and developing them is quite important. The maturity models and the other ones, probably benchmarking tools as well at times. We need to use that. But in the same way, we also, we're a Gartner subscriber, so we bring those tools as well and that capability. We spend a lot of time in the marketplace understanding what's happening elsewhere, such that, again, we can bring recent relevant thinking. And it's all, at a client pitch level, we're obviously looking to communicate to a client everything that we've got that might help give them the confidence that we might be the right choice. Once we're in there, then it's solely focused on the outcomes we're trying to generate. And because, first, we're like any other consulting firm, the first project's great, but you're looking to build long-term relationships with clients, and the delivery and the success of the first 1 or 2 projects, which will determine the level of trust that you have in the organisation.
Brilliant. Steve, I think we'll probably call it a day there. I could talk to you all day about this, but I feel I would find it more interesting than you would. So thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and continued success for Mason.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As ever, thank you for listening to the Consultancy Growth Podcast. This is Professor Joe Omani at joeomani.com.